right. One of the things I was thinking about before this event was I've been working in community development for 25 years, and I'm trying to figure out what community is. And one of the sort of inspirations I've had in this work is some insights from Pablo Neruda, the poet, the Chilean poet. And when he spoke, I've been very inspired by the speech he gave in Stockholm when he won the Nobel Prize in 1971. And in that speech, he talks a little bit about how he was a refugee from his home country. He was fleeing from Chile into Argentina through the mountains, and he was afraid, and there was fear and persecution and loneliness, and he really spent time thinking over the next 20 or 30 years of his career, thinking about how you could bridge that, how you could create connections with people around you to create community so that you could dispel that fear and live a more full life. And so he, in that speech, he says, "There is no insurmountable solitude. All paths lead to the same goal, to convey to others what we are. And we must pass through solitude and difficulty, isolation and silence in order to reach forth to the enchanted place where we can dance our clumsy dance and sing our sorrowful song. But in this dance or in this song, there is fulfilled the most ancient rights of our conscience in the awareness of being human and of believing in a common destiny." And he ends that speech by saying, "Lastly, I wish to say to the people of goodwill, to the workers, to the poets, to the future, that the future has been expressed in the line, only with a burning patience can we conquer the splendid city, which will give light, justice, and dignity to all mankind. In this way, the song will not have been sung in vain." And the burning patience that I just want to just rest in that phrase for a little bit and think about that as we go through a series of really beautiful essays that were part of a collection of essays that the San Francisco Fed convened with their partners, PolicyLink and ArtPlace. We're bringing together people who are really trying to find that how we enter those splendid cities of light and dignity for all. So I'd like to invite to the stage Liz Crane from ArtPlace America, who is one of the architects of that collection of essays, and we're very fortunate to have her. We did have an event similar to this in San Francisco a while back, and she said it was a little easier to get here this time because I just took the subway. So here she is, Liz Crane.
And I also want to thank the rest of the New York Federal Reserve staff who's worked really hard on this event. I know I've felt very taken care of in this process, so thank you to all of you who are helping us today. I also want to thank the San Francisco Federal Reserve and PolicyLink for their ongoing interest and support of this conversation. Before we get started, I want to begin by acknowledging that this gathering takes place on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. We collectively acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. We also collectively acknowledge that the institutions on this land are founded upon exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment from us to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. And with that, I want everyone in the room to take a breath, ground yourself in the place, because we have a really exciting afternoon ahead of us. I'm Liz Crane. I'm the Deputy Director at ArtPlace America and one of the co-editors of the journal, along with Laura Choi from the San Francisco Federal Reserve and Victor Rubin and Jeremy Liu of PolicyLink. I'm also the manager of ArtPlace's Community Development Investments Program, which is featured throughout the journal that we're going to be talking about today. So as many of you in this room know, ArtPlace America was founded almost 10 years ago, in many ways as a major capital and policy play. We were asking the question, how might a group of foundations pool their resources and power to help incentivize transformations in the status quo to better integrate arts and cultural strategies into the everyday work of community transformation and healing? We do that through strategic investments in projects, organizations, and systems to advance this practice as a part of equitable development. The field of creative placemaking has made great strides over the last decade in legitimizing the idea that arts and cultural strategies have a valuable role to play in equitable development. In 2014, the San Francisco Federal Reserve published the first journal on creative placemaking, which was certainly a really important step, I think, in a conversation that was just finding its legs. But as you'll hear throughout the day, understanding that this work has value is one of the first biggest barriers to overcome in having the work happen, but it's not the only barrier. So this second journal issue of the San Francisco Fed, to be focused on arts and culture, seeks to have a focused discussion around organizational and systems change and what this looks and feels like, particularly when that change is asking community development systems and artists, culture bearers, and designers to learn how to work together. So as my colleague Victor at PolicyLink notes in his article on organizational change, which I'm going to quote in full because I think it gets to the heart of the matter, the nonprofit sector builds affordable housing with government support or provides healthcare for low-income residents according to a massive and arcane set of rules and financial constraints that have conditioned its practitioners to be very careful and attentive to detail, to always know what they'll be getting from every contractor for each dollar, and to commit only to things on which they are authorized to spend. The creativity, such as it is, comes in maneuvering the systems to get the best results. In contrast, artists who care deeply about being engaged with society and with local communities are experts at freeing and stoking not only their own imagination, but also that of the people with whom they work. They're experts at helping folks not only express themselves, but also become unbound from conventions and envision a radically different future. And that is why we are here today, to help enact that radical future. The journal itself is largely oriented around lessons from ArtPlace's Community Development Investments Program, which was incidentally launched alongside the first journal on creative placemaking back in 2015. We spent 3 years with 6 community development organizations to understand their missions and how they functioned, and then help them to look at how and where in their development processes and pipelines local artists, culture bearers, and designers could bring new ways of thinking, new lenses to their work, and new approaches for engaging and organizing with their communities to lead to more equitable futures. This could mean anything from having Daniel Johnson, an artist in Jackson, Mississippi, helping the Jackson Medical Mall think about how a place for health transactions could transform into a place for community connections and healing. Or having the Cook Inlet Housing Authority, a tribally designated housing entity in Anchorage, Alaska, figure out how to reintroduce storytelling as a key practice for reinvigorating community engagement. Having an artist help the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership in rural Minnesota to get to know more about its refugee residents in an affordable housing complex to be able to better meet their needs. Having a committee of Zuni artists help design a new park to promote cultural resiliency with the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project in New Mexico. Having artists help to strategize around ending cycles of displacement in Little Tokyo with the Little Tokyo Service Center in downtown Los Angeles. Or having artists help lay the groundwork for stronger collaborations between the Fairmount Park Conservancy and the Strawberry Mansion community in Philadelphia around new capital investments that would serve the community that had been there for decades. You can read the stories from their journeys in the journal, and you'll be hearing more about some of them today as well. Each of these organizations had to learn new skills, develop new relationships, and think differently about their work. They learned a lot of critical lessons along the way, such as making sure local artists are at that proverbial table long before that proverbial menu is planned, and to leave room for discovery potential, that not all projects had to have a very distinct and concrete set of outcomes at the outset, but that sometimes the most magical things that happen are the things we don't anticipate. If you're wondering how all of this is done, there are also articles in the journal that talk about supporting this change through technical assistance, leading this change as CEOs of the organizations, and making sense of this change in this interdisciplinary work by researchers. This last piece can be particularly difficult and vexing, and especially in a community development context. As my colleague Jamie Hand at ArtPlace noted in her article about translating this cross-sector work, it requires a unique combination of rigor and flexibility, with methods that honor both the linear and the nonlinear, the established and the experimental, the known and the unknown, the logic model and the lived experience. We also show how leading community development intermediaries like NeighborWorks, Enterprise, and LISC are also taking up this work as critical support for long-term power building and resiliency in communities. And There's more ands. There's always more ands with this journal. It's 202 pages. There are a number of articles that take us up even one step further to look at the enabling environment for creative placemaking. So looking at the 10th anniversary of the National Endowment for the Arts Our Town program, or how to advance this work through state policy and comprehensive planning, and even, yes, how financial institutions may need to adjust their own practices to support this work. In the case of the latter, Deborah Kassemeyer from financial institution Northern Trust notes that practitioners are often already doing the work. It's the financial institutions that don't always know how to see it. For example, she suggests looking at how financing decisions can restrict or expand community vision in new projects, and challenges banks to ask questions along the way related to arts and culture during their approval processes, like what things have been deemed important by the community but have not been included in the final budget? Or does this development fit into the neighborhood and contribute to maintaining the neighborhood's culture? She also says, when you mix in arts and culture as a critical ingredient for successful affordable housing, the questions change from, why is this important, to how do we think creatively to plug the financial gap for something that is critical for the project's success? Critical for the project's success, which is a good reason to try to figure out how do you plug that gap. So how are we turning how might we into how must we? How do we better align the community and development and arts sector as a whole? How are we integrating it into the process of planning as well as the plans? How do we acknowledge that when you bring arts and culture into community development conversations, it fundamentally changes the kinds of decisions that get made about the future of our communities? And that we need to support artists, culture bearers, and designers in partnering in this work. Moving dollars and cents into this work isn't just about how you can finance a deal. It's about how you place value, metaphorical and literal, on how decisions happen in communities and what gets built. It's about what happens in spaces and places after the construction cranes go away. It's about seeing all of the cultural assets, histories, and aspirations that communities hold and making sure not to erase them as we move forward because we weren't ready to expand our imaginations to make them pencil out. You'll hear shortly from Penelope Douglas at Culture Bank, who says in her article, artists and arts and cultural enterprises are left out of major investments despite their proven ability to understand and celebrate the depth and diversity of community assets that exist and that matter to people. They are the missing piece if we are to invest for an equitable and regenerative future. In the Creating Process for Change article, the Center for Performance and Civic Practice says, if place is geography bound by meaning, by shared meanings, if place plus time equals change, what does change do to meaning? How is meaning shaped? By whom? For whom? Artists keep, make, and transform meaning. It is what they do. Their relationship to place, in addition to inhabiting it, is to see it and listen to it. Whether intentionally or not, every creative act, every moment of imagination and expression in a place contributes to that place's shape. And finally, Michael McAfee of PolicyLink says in his culminating piece with Rip Rapson, this is the work for us to be doing at this moment in our nation because one, our institutions that are central to a strong democracy have a very limited aperture, and two, we are grossly disconnected from resident voice and power. We can't seem to find the right set of strategies to alleviate so many of the problems that frustrate us because we are unmoored from the soul of the community, which to me is arts and culture. We need to make sure our policies and funding streams are set up to incentivize and prioritize community voice and to invest or reinvest in communities that financial institutions have historically left behind in a way that reflects who they are and what they want to be. So I hope you pick up one of the limited copies of the journal on the way out. We won't be giving them unless you stay the whole time, so stay the whole time. Even better for our environment, check it out digitally and let that paper copy go to somebody else. The link is on the back of your program. As David said, we'd also love for you to tweet at #SFFedArts to let us know what you think and to be a part of this conversation long term. And I'm really excited about what we're going to be sharing today. You'll get to hear from some of the authors and organizations that are featured in the journal. And beyond that, you'll also get to hear about some of the transformative work that's happening right here in New York City to explore how the lessons articulated in this journal also apply right here in our backyard. Through collaborations such as that between artists and the New York City Department of Probation around community transformation and healing, and the way in which institutions such as the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation have long seen arts and culture as a pillar of their work. So thank you, and I'm excited to get this party started.